All right, good morning, everyone, or afternoon. I guess it's still morning. We are going to be talking about engagement strategies that we can use with our students. So, going from maybe a boring lesson to having it be engaging for our learners. And we're going to transform those lessons so that way we are able to kind of make engagement and have learning be fun. So, when we're looking at engagement, there is a couple different things that come to this concept. So, cognitive, behavior, and emotion. So, all three of these different things are kind of a part of engagement, and we have to think about each of these different parts when we're trying to engage our learners. And then there is a science of fun. So, research has kind of showed us that when we make learning fun and it's not maybe a one off event, and we are having student maybe where they're using repetition and dedication, their learning experience can be fun. And so we want to keep our learners curious and keep them coming back for more. And so some of the strategies we're going to talk about and some of the resources is we are going to engage our students before they get into the learning. So until they dive deep into that learning, they are going to begin to what does it mean to be curious? What does it mean to engage in the material? And then also employees. So you as an educator are more likely to try new things if your work environment is fun. And so if you're having fun, you are most likely willing to try new strategies. You're willing to fail forward and try new things as well. Also, research has showed us that when fun increases, our levels of dopamine and endorphins and oxygen and all of those different hormones are really key for success. So we have an increase in those hormones, and that will help our success when it comes to learning as well. And then evidence has also found that when people learn better, when they're feeling a strong positive emotions, and that's where fun can come into it as well. So that's kind of the research behind why we need to engage our students, why the learning sticks when we do make it fun for them. So we're going to walk through 5 different strategies when it comes to engagement. So the first one is understanding learners. So we need to understand our students first. Then we're going to walk through gamification. Then we're going to talk about interactive learning, multimedia, and then collaborative learning. And the slides with all of the resources will be at the end of the presentation. So I will send out the bit.ly link for that. And then you'll be able to explore all of the resources within the presentation too. So the first one is understanding our learners. We really need to know who our learners are by building those relationships with our students. And so when we are trying to build our relationships with our students, there's 2 kind of key ways I like to do this. Also with these resources, you'll click on the image and then usually a YouTube video will pop up. That resource is there for you if you're like, what did Stephanie say? I'm also recording this session too. And then down below the YouTube video is the link to the resource. So again, there will be a YouTube video with most of the resources, so that way you can come back to it and learn about the resource again if you're like, I need a recap. And then down here is the link to the resource. So one way that we're able to capture our students is by using a data binder. This is kind of a one-stop shop where we can gather all of our students' information. In prior years, we've used Google Sheets, we've used Google Slides, and it just wasn't really helpful for teachers. It was kind of too messy. And so what we started to do is we created this Google spreadsheet. And you can see here, we've got all of these tabs at the bottom. So when I'm coaching a teacher, I will meet with them and we will kind of talk through what is our goals for this year? What do we want to capture within our students? And then we'll customize this spreadsheet to fit that student or that teacher's need. And so on the data binder, the teacher is able to have the student type in their birth date. They can have their parent email, their dream job, their favorite part about school, any activities they're a part of, how they learn best. And sometimes there are drop downs where the students are able to come in here and add, hey, I learn best in a group, or I learn best by processing maybe individually first. And so your students are able to come in and customize all of this for their own personal needs. And so usually what happens is what our teachers do is they use a unit 0. So at the start of the year, they use this thing and it's called Unit 0. And it walks through all of the expectations for the students and just to have the students kind of understand the flow of that classroom. And on here, they will work on their data binder. So on that Unit 0, they will kind of fill out their data binder. They won't fill it out all at once. It's kind of an ongoing document that is placed in the learning management system. So if our learning management system is Google Classroom, every student gets a copy of this data binder. So here is an example of a Unit 0. And so one of the activities might be for the students to complete their data binder. And you can kind of see here, it's walking them through the start of the lesson, how the classroom's set up, what motivates the student. There's all different kinds of activities for the students to complete and learn about the classroom. So that way it frees you up. This is kind of cloning you because there's videos built in, and you could recreate your own videos to fit your classroom. But then it frees you up as a teacher to be able to support your students one-on-one. And so when we're looking at the data binder, the next section is where you can start to really get to know your students. You can provide, if you're into personality tests, there is a personality test that you could have your students complete. And it's really interesting how we're all different. And my friend Stephanie Rothstein created Can We Talk EDU. So it's a website. And on the website, there's a video that walks through all of the different personalities and how she uses this in her classroom. And what happens is there's 4 colors in this personality test. And with those 4 colors, we each have our strengths and we also have weaknesses. And so on here, you can see that the gold, I am a gold, that person is very detail oriented. They're a rule follower. They like structure. Your blues are the ones that really love to check in with you. They want to know what's going on in your life. The greens are your questioners. They like to ask a lot of questioners. They like to research. They like to know the why and the purpose. And then your orange folks are your adventurous. They're the fun. They are the ones that can wing it a lot of times. And so once you know about your students, or you can know about these 4 different types, you're able to point your students out and you can then provide them better feedback. And so for an example, a yellow, they most likely have read the rubric. They know exactly what's on the rubric, what the expectation is. Where your greens, they will need questioned, okay? So they're the ones that you're going to have to question them about maybe a mistake or something that they left out or something that they're still struggling with. So instead of telling them, you might try to make it formed into a question. Where your oranges, they need it very focused on them. They really need you to get to the point, and you probably need to add their name and personalize that feedback to really match their needs. And then our blues, they need that feedback sandwich. So they need a positive, the negative, and then they also need a positive. These students also need you to have a relationship with them before you provide them any feedback. So again, it can be really helpful to know all of this information when we're getting to know our students, about to create those engaging lessons, because once we know our students, we're really going to be able to personalize and help them when it comes to education. So on here, students would be able to type in their scores for each of the colors. There's also like a monthly reflection in here where students are able to complete a Google slide. And then the students actually send this home to their parents. So right here is the spreadsheet that you could have set up. And then it uses Autocrat. And again, there's a video that walks you through this. And your students can do this weekly or monthly. But again, they're starting to take ownership of their learning because they are learning how to reflect, build that metacognition skills, and then they are able to send this report home to their parents. So this is kind of the weekly reflection. Again, you could do it weekly, monthly. You can just change the terminology. And then what the students are able to do is they can send this to their parents, so that way their parents are able to see how their week went. And then their parents can have that conversation with them. And again, it's coming from their child. It's not coming from you as the teacher. It's coming from them. So then they're able to really dive deep and have a conversation with their child about how they did and how they responded on their weekly reflection. The next thing on here is just some, again, other Google Forms to get to know your students. There's an executive functioning assessment that you could add, and your students could share their lowest area. So maybe they struggle with organization or time management. You're able then to pick that out right away and then cater your instruction and help those students build those skills so they can be successful in your classroom. There's also where growth mindset, so knowing if a student has a fixed mindset or maybe they have a growth mindset. And then down here, they're able to use the drop-down boxes and decide, do they like noise or no noise at all when they focus? Do the students work best when they are sitting at their desk, maybe on a stool, on maybe like a kitchen table? Where do they learn best? So again, as you get to know your students and have them fill out this data binder, and again, you can decide what to keep and what to get rid of, you're able to have a one-stop shop on that child to really dive deep and help them achieve their best when they kind of get going and start to learn more about them. The next activity is using a this or that board. So allowing your students choice and voice as they get started in their learning. So right here, you can see there's a bunch of different designs for this. Here's one example that I'm going to show is during winter time, but students had to complete this top area. So this board is for a week, so it's a week long. And what happened is students had to complete each of these activities first. So every day in that week, they had to figure out how they were going to manage their time to complete this top area. Then down here, they had some choice. So down here, they had some choice. And you can see this one, they had to do the measurement activity. Every single student had to do that. But as soon as they were done, they placed the snowman on top of it to know that they have completed that activity. Then they could choose between Zap Facts or Capture 4. So students would pick one of these activities that they could choose. It didn't matter to the teacher because the students were practicing facts. How they went about it, again, they had some choice in how they could decide how they were going to complete their math facts. Word problems, same thing. They could either do the word problem paper or they could play a game bump. So again, they're practicing the same concept, but how they're doing it is just a little bit different. Over here, these were have to do's. So they had to finish these. There was no choice with those activities. But again, you can kind of decide, do they get a lot of choice or do they maybe get a choice every single time, or maybe they don't. And usually what I suggest to teachers is start looking at the standard. What does the standard say? What is your end goal? Using that backwards design for planning. Here's another example where the students had vocabulary. So that was the goal. They had to learn vocabulary for this chapter. They could either use a Frere model or they could create a game. Again, it didn't matter to me which option they decided. They could make that decision. And then they had to read chapter 1. But as they were reading, they could either do the game of quotes or they could do a terrible reading activity where the students had these little cards along the side. And on their cards, they had to find certain pieces of the reading that kind of pointed out and then just rip them off when they found that simile or rip it off when they found that metaphor. Another thing that students had to do was they had to write. So they had to write either using story cubes, which are those dice with images on them, or they could complete an 8-part. So if we were looking at the story cubes, what students had to do is you can have the physical story cubes that you can buy on Amazon, or there are some digital templates as well where the students can come in and there's all of these icons on here. And then based on their chosen icons, they have to write and incorporate a story about those icons. Or the students could have done an 8 parts, which is an edgy protocol activity. And this is where the students have to fill in this graphic organizer around their summary. So they first fill out this brainstorm. And by doing this, students come up of the different 8 parts of speech. So they come up with creative nouns, adjectives, pronouns, a simile, and you can change any of these to fit your style for your classroom. And then what they have to do is they have to write a story using what they created on the outside of this graphic organizer. So that can be another way for your students to just kind of think about, hey, do I want to use the story cubes where I write a story using these 8 dice? Or do I want to come in and I want to do the 8 parts activity? So again, same idea, same goal. They're writing a summary about what they just read, but how they go about it can be completely up to them with that this or that choice board. So again, in this template, there are so many different examples. And if you find one that you're like, you can just go up to File, and then you're able to make a copy of that, just that slide. So selected slides, and then you can be able to customize or edit your activity to fit your students' needs. The next category is gamification. So gamification can be another way to engage our learners by using games. So I love playing games and I am pretty competitive. And when it comes back to those personalities, there are 4 different types of gamers. And so when we're looking at those 4 different types of gamers and personality tests, a lot of students love games. The reason why they love games might be a little bit different. But again, it can just kind of help us be able to cater our instruction to them. So when we're looking at games, there are a ton of different games that our students can play, and there's different upgrades and things that you can do in your own classroom to support your students. And so when I'm looking at games, there are 4 types of gamers. And I want you to just kind of think about what you might be. And I have a test too if you're interested in it. So we have a killer. This is the student that wants to beat everybody. This student wants to beat everyone in your class. They will even cheat to win, okay? The achiever. There's an achiever is the next one. And this student wants to earn as many badges. They want to earn as many points as they can. Their goal is just to get all of the badges and to achieve the game. You have the socializer. This student is just there to hang out. They just want to work in a collaborative group. They want to talk with other other students in that group. And then you have the explorer. This student just wants to click all the buttons. They want to explore what's going on in the game. So having the 4 different personalities or 4 different types of gamers actually can help them be engaged in their learning. And so because there are so many different types of students, games can really apply to each of them. And so this first one is called Gamble or Guarantee. And how you can play is you'll have questions. So you can either have questions off of a worksheet, you can have task card questions, whatever type of questions you want to have. And on those questions, you're going to write down or have your questions ready to go. Your students are going to decide, do they gamble or do they guarantee? If they gamble, the points change every single round. If they guarantee, it's always 1,000 points. So it cannot be -40, it can't be -4,000. It is always 1,000 points. Students answer. If they get it correct, they decide if they want to gamble or guarantee. They write it down and then they review the answer. So down here, I have like a little scorecard for the students where they will write guarantee or gamble if they got the question right. And then they'll just put the point value for each of the different rounds. Okay. So again, they write gamble or guarantee really small or GA, GU, and then they'll write the point value. And then at the end, they total it up. So I give the students a question. So for example, 2 + 2. Okay, the students answer 4, so they got it right. Then they decide, do they want to gamble or do they want to guarantee? This group decides they want to gamble. So they are at -4,000 points. Again, if they guaranteed, it's always 1,000. I give them another question, 3 + 3. They answer 6. Okay, this time they decide to guarantee because they lost that point. They now have 1,000, but if they would have gambled, they would have been at 4,000 points. And again, they're just keeping track on their little scorecard. And then at the end of the game, we tally it up and we find our winner. And that winner might get a can of beets, or they might get something really fun like candy, whatever I am willing to give, or extra recess, different things like that. Or they just might not win anything. We might just play a game. And so on here, you can go in and you can change these little scores to fit your classroom needs. But again, guarantees always 1,000. The gamble, it change. If you are a math teacher, you could change the points to fractions or decimals. And then when the students have to add it up, they're just practicing another skill if they're working on fractions or decimals. So that can be another way as well. Students love this game. They're really engaged and they love deciding what is behind the door when it comes to gambling. Another activity is called grudge ball. And how you play with grudge ball is there's these X's. Okay, so every team gets 10 X's. You ask them questions. So again, you're going to have your task card, your worksheet, anywhere you can pull questions from. And you're going to have the students on different teams. So you'll split up your class. If you have a smaller group or smaller class, you can just have every single student in their own group. Each group will get a question. If they get it right, they automatically get to erase 2 X's from the board. They can take it from one team or they can split their score. So for example, I get it right, I could take from team 1 or team 3, or I could take 2 from both of team 2. Okay, so they're trying to get rid of as many X's as they can, and they're trying to keep their X's up on the board. Students can also decide, this is up to you. So you can either just play that way where students will take away the X's by getting questions correct, or you can have them shoot a basketball or trash get ball. And what students will do is they will have that basketball or that trash get ball, and they will then go in and they can shoot. If they make it from the 2-point line, they get to erase 4 X's. If they get it from that 5-point line, they get to erase 5. So again, you could add that add-on off, or you could decide, hey, today we're just erasing X's, no shooting the ball. And then you could add that in later. Or again, you can play it as is. It's up to you how you kind of want to do it. But your students will have a lot of fun. And again, 5 if they get it by the 3-point line, 4 if they get it by the 2-point line. And then if they get the question right, they can do 2. If they don't make it and they shoot, then they just don't get to erase the point. So it's kind of like a risk if they do want to shoot the ball. And then interactive learning. So we've already kind of explored getting to know our learners, gamification, and now we're going to explore how do we interact with students to get them excited about what they are learning about. So this one right here is called Diamond 9. And what you'll do is you will take any concept you are teaching and you will just add that to the text. So for example, if I was teaching about the 3 little pigs, I might write all of the names of the characters here, and I might put the wolf, I might add the setting, I might kind of add some of the complex, like the plot. And what students have to do is they have to do most important to least important. So they're working in a group, and they're deciding what is the most important parts of this story, what's the least, and they're justifying. As they're working out and as they're dragging this Diamond 9, they are justifying their answers with each other. They can either drag on here, or you can print this out and they can have like cuttables where they actually make it on the table. So that's one way that you can use Diamond 9s. You could also have important people in our culture or in our history. And then they have to decide who is the most important and who's the least important. You could do math symbols. Okay, what's the most important math symbol? Which is the least? And again, where they're diving into that depth of knowledge is where they are thinking about and justifying their evidence in that small group time with their team. Another great activity is to get our students brainstorming with crazy 8s. So whenever there's a problem, a lot of companies use crazy 8s to use with design thinking. And so what students can do, it's going to push them beyond just their first idea. So using like problem-based learning and having the students come up with one idea per a box. This works great for writing as well if we're trying to get our students to brainstorm what they want to write about. And what happens is students have 30 seconds per box. So this timer right here has 30 seconds, and then it has a 10-second break, and then it starts up again with 30 seconds. And so again, every box is 30 seconds, one idea per the box. Then what happens is when students finish that timer, they stop, 10-second break, and they go on to that next box until we're out of ideas. Students can draw their ideas, they can sketch them. Maybe you're having recess issues or some type of issue. Have your students do a crazy 8 to help with that ownership and to help them get excited about solving the problem that is kind of in their classroom that they can kind of take ownership with. You can also use this again for writing assignments where they're trying to brainstorm a topic, or if you're just trying to get them maybe to think about what they've learned, do a crazy eight. What have you learned? That retrieval practice can be a really great way to test your students' knowledge as well. And then there is another one as well. It's called Innovation Challenge. This could be a great morning meeting activity to get your students thinking about their learning. And so there's a website down here. And on this website, they will design a way to reach things up high for Christmas time, or you can randomize it and it will give you a new prompt. So great for morning meetings where I might say, okay, or bell work, design a first aid kit that requires at least 5 people to use. And so then what the students do is they brainstorm their ideas to this problem, and then they will pitch it. So they're working on skills to explain their knowledge. So they can draw a sketch of their innovation. They're going to explain how it works. They're going to name their product, and then they come up with a slogan. You can change these bottom boxes to fit whatever you need. But again, it's just getting students to think outside the box and getting them very creative. And you can just randomize this again. Design a bed for a baby, or design a first aid kit for a king or queen. And again, the students are able to see all of these different things that they might need to make and improve on. And then they're learning to share with a partner and how to pitch an idea as well. Now we're going to explore multimedia. So when we're looking at multimedia, there can be a lot of things that we're able to use. This first one is creating a podcast. So our students can work with a group. They can decide if they want to be maybe an expert or if they want to lead the conversation. But for this example, the students had 2 choices. They could write or podcast about their life in middle school, or they could talk about the big transition. So again, they had a couple different options here when it came to creating a podcast. Then what the students had is they had a roadmap in order to create the podcast, just to help them flow and to work on that time management skill that a lot of students might lack. So for example, their goal was to create a 5 to 6 minute podcast, and they had to create with a classmate to listen to. So their audience was that classmate. Another student was going to listen to this. They could pick their topic. So again, my life in middle school, where they focused on 6th grade and they just reflected about what they learned about in 6th grade and the challenges that maybe occurred or took place. There's also this other one. It was called the big transition that they could have chosen as well. And so when students were looking at these 2 choices, they could then decide with their partner which option they wanted their podcast to be focused on. So with the podcast, students then made that decision. Some students maybe had their own idea, and we just allowed them to get that approved by the teacher. But whatever your topic is, this again was at the end of the school year for students to reflect and give advice to 5th graders that were coming into 6th grade. You could just change these 2 activities to fit whatever you needed to fit for your podcast topic. Then on slide number 4, students plan their podcast. So they came up with their title, they came up with their episode. So what is their big podcast called? What is their smaller episode called for this one that they're about to record? And then they had to type in their notes, or again, you could print this off and they could do it on a piece of paper. So they had to think about what was the main message that the podcast episode was about. What was it going to be about? What's the main message you're trying to get across to your audience? Then they had to think about a favorite memory that they had from middle school. They had to share a tip from middle school. Then they had to think about what was their greatest achievement in middle school, the fact about middle school that they kind of learned throughout the years, and then what was maybe an obstacle that they explored, their call to action, what do they want the listeners to do after they listen to the episode, a friend or teacher advice or perspective, and then how can they make the podcast pop? Can they add music, sound effects, voiceovers? What can they do to make that podcast really pop? Do they need to talk really soft at one point, or do they need to like yell or be a little bit louder at another point? So thinking about their tone here. Students can do a podcast for almost any subject. We've done them for social studies, science, ELA, math. And what they can do then is after they plan out their podcast, they then write their show notes. So they use this graphic organizer to help them write out their show notes of who's going to say what's going to be kind of the order of the episode. When do I want to bring this point up? When do I want to bring that point up? Who's going to say what? If I'm interviewing someone, what questions should I ask them? So thinking about how they want to organize that and creating their show notes. Then they recorded their podcast, and students used WeVideo to record their podcast for this. There's so many different websites that you could use, but again, we used WeVideo. And the students had to create their podcasts, and it was okay if they messed up, because in WeVideo, they could go back and edit and really kind of think about their mistakes. And again, that was part of the editing process. And then finally, they were to edit their podcasts. So on this slide, we just kind of made sure that they knew, what does it mean to make a podcast pop? So using maybe an intro and an outro music. So this was kind of the aspire to do activities. If students completed their podcast, they had some of these activities just to make it pop a little bit more. They could also give sound effects. So we talked about what that might be when we're having sound effects for our listeners. They could also give maybe like an interview or a story to help explain what they're kind of explaining and their topic, and adding that passion into their project. They could look up facts and find statistics about this and add those interesting facts in as well. They could also give voice to their episode. So using that tone and kind of maybe cheerful at certain points, or maybe they have more of a serious tone at others. And so once students edited their podcast, they then submitted their podcast using a Google form. So they just put their name and then their podcast URL. This was at the end of the WeVideo. It gives them like a link. And then what we did is students did a gallery walk, and they listened to each other's podcasts. So they just had their computers up on their desk, and then they had a piece of paper. It was called Glows and Grows. And on this piece of paper, students went around and wrote a glow. What's something that the student did really good at? And what is a grow? What's something that might need improved? So here is an example of what that looked like, where they wrote something that that was good, and then something that needed an improvement on. And then they just left that little note at the desk, and then they were able to move on to the next student. And then they looked over their feedback, and they were able to see, okay, what was really good, what wasn't really good. And then at the very end, they came back and they reflected on their podcast project. So they thought about what was the most important things they learned about their podcasts, when it comes to their completed podcast episode, what are they maybe proud of? And then when it came to their podcast, what would they change for next time? So focusing on those three questions allowed them to kind of think about, what would I do differently if I was to do this again? And what did I really love about podcasting? What did I love about this process? And then there was a rubric kind of allowed us to just kind of give them feedback, and it had the success criteria. So we wanted to make sure it had useful information, it was well explained, and it was in an order that made sense. It wasn't just jumping all over the place. We also wanted to make sure it was creative, engaging, and effective. And then it was edited. So they went back into WeVideo and edited, and then we could leave teacher comments as well. So podcasts are just one way that we're able to engage our learners when it comes to their learning. This was another activity where students did a book trailer. So they used WeVideo. They read the book Touching Spirit Bear, and then they had to create a quick trailer to explain Touching Spirit Bear in their video. So students had a wonder wall. A wonder wall is a great way to have your students look over information about what they're about to learn, and it is clearly laid out in an agenda way, so they know, what are we learning, why are we learning it, and when have we learned it. This is from John Hattie, those 3 questions, and it's great to kind of, again, bring teacher clarity to your students so they know exactly the points and why they should be learning this information. So here they were then broken down into the day. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then students had to complete these activities by the end of the day. If they finished this, they just went ahead. They got ahead of pace. And their goal, again, was to get all of the check marks done by the end of that class period for the day. If they didn't, then they had a conference with the teacher and come up with a game plan to think about what they were going to do in order to meet that goal. Here was the success criteria for the project. So laying the success criteria out helped students know exactly what the expectation was and what was expected from them. So again, that goal was to create a book trailer. They had to first introduce the book. They had to have the title and the author. They then summarized the book, and they had to introduce the main characters, the conflict, and preview some of maybe that action that was coming. So they used this to help them brainstorm their project out loud. This was a scaffold for students that needed it, where it has the book title and author, because again, that was part of the success criteria, and then using maybe the characters here. And so this was a scaffold for the students that needed it. Other students that did not need it just got a blank storyboard, and they were able to create their video project. They also had to include audio explaining what happened during their book trailer. They created a video, GIF, or they could use photos to incorporate within their video. They had to provide information about the plot, but they could not spoil the end. So that was kind of a trick. They had to think about how they were going to engage their audience without giving too much away. And then they had to film their video, and it had to be between 30 and 1 minute long. And then there were some can-do options for students if they finished early, where they could customize their video, the fonts, the transitions, the background music. And then they could also create a movie trailer that they created in Google Drawings or on paper to explain the book as well. Here was a roadmap that helps students follow the plan and learn WeVideo. So they were able to come in here and learn a little bit of how do I import media? How do I import audio? And kind of bulk planning this allowed me, again, to be cloned and then help other students as needed. They saw an example video of what it looked like. Because this was a multi-day project, on Tuesday and on the following days, we asked the students, okay, where are you at the end of day one? And they had to move their little marker to where they were at to show us, oh, I'm working on my storyboard today. Well, guess what? Today I completed it. Today I'm about 50% done with my video. And then here I'm ready for a how inspection. So students were able to drag these little dots to let us know where they were, and that allowed us to check in with them, provide them the support that they needed in order to complete this project. And then the next thing was having a rubric. So we applied and had a rubric for the students, again, with the success criteria, so they knew exactly what they were being graded on, what their video must include. And so they kind of, again, they follow it along with this rubric so they knew what needed to be included. And then at the very end, students went around and they did a gallery walk. So we had their computers up and students had a clipboard for feedback. And we used tag feedback when it came to giving them that feedback, which we're going to explain in the next section. Now we're looking at collaborative learning. So when we're thinking about collaborative learning, this is students working together in groups. So I'm going to go ahead and go over the game plan. So with that game plan that we talked about from that Touching Spirit Bear project, students came in and they had to leave tag feedback. So they had to tell something that they liked. They had to ask a question, give a suggestion, and then they had to initial it. They also had to rate it between 1 and 5. 1 meaning poor and 5 meaning excellent. Students had sentence starters to help them think about how they wanted to word the feedback for tell, ask, and give. And then they also saw an example. Okay, students are really bad at giving feedback, so we have to teach them and we have to use protocols. And so for this one, what I said is, here is the rubric category. And if you want to tell somebody that you liked how they did the book title and the author, you might say something like, I really like how you used the title and the author of the book in your video. If you had a question about it, you might say, why did you pick that font for the title and the author of the book? If you wanted to give a suggestion, capitalize Ben Michelson's first and last initial at the 37-second mark. Okay, so we learned how to give the feedback to our students. They saw me model it by taking that rubric and really focusing in on that feedback. So they knew, how do I ask this a question? How do I ask this if I wanted to give a suggestion to that student? And I also taught the students that whenever we can add or tag in that 37-second mark, whenever we can tag in evidence from that student's response, we're able to create a stronger feedback circle to them to really help them focus in on their learning as well. This activity is called the timeline reveal. And what students do is they work in groups, and in their groups, they have these little cards. They review all of the events that took place. Then what happens is they have to discuss the events. So all of these events, they're discussing them with their groups. This time they have not learned this information. It's some of that prior knowledge, trying to get them curious about what they're learning about. After they discussed the events, they then had to put these events in order. So they had a giant timeline. This was not digital. And they took these cards and they had to place them in order on the timeline. Again, they have not learned this information yet. So they're just discussing what prior knowledge they have as a group to try to figure this out. After they placed the events in order, they then had to compare them with the correct answer. So then I popped up my timeline and they compared their events with theirs. And they reviewed their correct and incorrect answers with their group. So they talked about, oh, we got this one right, but we were a little off here. Why do you think that? And then they reflected with their group as well. So one, the students were engaged with this topic because they were wondering, well, why did maybe slavery come after or before this event? And they were able to, again, work with their group and talk about all of the prior knowledge that they had about this topic or lack of prior knowledge to kind of just think. And again, they were more curious about the information that was being brought to them. Personalization. So that's where we might use our data binder again to begin to personalize our instruction for our students. So when it comes to personalization, you can use that true color test again, where you might have different students working on a different activity based on their personality, and having them kind of think through a topic and then completing these different activities for them to really show their strengths when it comes to their personality. They also might do some type of like activities. So blue, for example, might do like a visual, and then they might play a game with a partner because again, our blues love to work together. Your greens, they might create like a 2D model. And then once they're done, they might create a video because they're going to need some processing time to think about what they want to say in their video. Your golds, they are going to maybe create that cell analogy where they're looking for similarities. And then what they might do is they are going to create an activity where they are producing like a product. And then your oranges, they are going to do a fun activity where they do a photo scavenger hunt. And with the photo scavenger hunt, what happens, this is from Amanda Sandervalt, if you follow her on Twitter. Students have all of these words on the side, and then they have to take photos. Now, they can't grab the photos from Google. They actually have to make the photos with their group, or they have to find them in the classroom. So for an example, atoms, the students had to think about, well, what does an atom look like? Again, they could not grab from Google. They either had to make it with their group and take a screenshot that way. So they click this little icon and then they hit camera. And once they did that, they created their own image, recreation of what atoms look like. So same for all of these different activities. And then the justification, upping that DOK again, where they had to write the explanation of how this could be used and how they might see it within their own group. Then the students, again, they were able to work together, they had some fun, and then the students came back together and completed reflections. So what a great idea, or what fun the students can have catering their learning to their personality style and thinking about, okay, well, what would a blue student like to do compared to a gold, and thinking about that too. We also use a lot of roadmaps. So you kind of saw a couple roadmaps throughout this presentation, but this can help with a lot of different executive functioning skills where students can self-pace along these different activities. You can make can do, aspire to do, or must do activities along the way. And then students, again, they're able to complete these activities. They can have checkpoints in with you where you're inspecting their work to make sure that they are covering every single activity on that board. So there's a couple different models here of just some blank ones that you can use. It works really well for writing because writing is very self-paced, and the students will start and then they complete all of these different activities, again, at their own pace. There's teacher check-ins. If you want to color code it to make some of them must do, can do, or aspire to activities, you can do that as well. So we want to, again, engage our learners. It's so critical when we're using effective teaching and learning. When we have our students engaged, they're going to be excited about what they're learning. And typically there is less classroom management issues as well. So I also encourage you to join the Google group. So right here is the Google group. There will be a join button up here. And this is a way for you to collaborate with other educators once I share the slides. Some of the resources might ask you for access. And so if that happens, you just need to join the Google group. And there is also a video to kind of walk you through if you're having trouble, or you can email me for help. But this will give you access to some of the activities that are locked. They're all free, but just in case you need them. And then here is the link to the slides. So right here, it's bit.ly/3, I believe it's an O, and it has to be capitalized. P, capital S, Z, capital Q, capital X. And let me change the sharing settings real quick. Oh, no, we're good. Okay. So I'll give you guys a second to hop on there. It looks like one person got it, so that is good. And again, if you click on the images, that's where you will find all of the links to either a video resource to support you or the link to the activity. If you're asking for request access, just make sure you join that Google group. And then as soon as you refresh, you'll be able to access that resource. But thank you so much for joining me. If there's questions, feel free to come up and ask. If you need questions as well, feel free to email me on Twitter or send me an email to my actual email. I also have a podcast if you're interested in learning more. It's called Control the Chaos. We talk about classroom management and technology. It's kind of together. And then also Gold EDU, it's a great group with other educators. And then if you're interested as well, I have a book on executive functioning as well. But thank you so much for joining me. And again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out.